I noticed something was wrong with my diary 3 nights ago. I always keep that notebook locked inside the top drawer of my desk. I have a small key that I carry in my pocket, and nobody else knows about it. I'm the kind of man who records everything. I write down what I eat, how long I sleep, and which chores I complete. I note the phone calls I make, the places I visit, and the smallest details of my day. It's not an obsession. I just like order. That diary is my record of reality. So when I saw words on a page that I didn't write, my stomach turned. I had come home late, around 11 p.m. My day had been normal. I worked on some spreadsheets, answered emails, and drove around running errands. After I brushed my teeth and changed into a t-shirt and shorts, I went to the desk to jot down my usual nightly notes. That's when I realized the diary was open, flipped to a page near the middle. The words stood out. They were in dark blue ink with a handwriting style I had never seen before. Sharp letters, tighter spacing, and no slant. It was definitely not my handwriting. At first I thought someone had broken in to play a prank, but I checked my desk drawer. It was still locked. The key was still in my pocket. Everything else looked untouched. I stared at the new text. It read, "I met him again at that bar near the old bus station. He kept saying we're the same, but I don't believe it. He looks like me, talks like me, but everything's off. I might be losing my mind." The date on top was the current date, except it said 4 p.m. That was impossible because I was at my office at 4 p.m., not at any bar. My pulse thumped in my chest. I ran my finger across the ink to see if it was dry. It felt dry. I couldn't smell fresh ink. I flipped the diary back a few pages to see if there were more unexpected entries, but the rest of my notes looked normal. I started to sweat. I checked each page carefully. The only suspicious entry was that paragraph at the center of the diary. The edges of the notebook were smooth and unmarked. No sign of tampering. I closed the diary, locked it, and tried to calm down. I thought maybe I'd had some kind of lapse, but that made no sense. I've never had memory problems, and the handwriting was nothing like mine. My own writing has neat loops and a slight right slant. The writing on that mysterious entry looked mechanical and precise. I barely slept that night. I kept thinking about how someone could have done it. Nobody else had access to my desk. My windows were locked. I live alone. In the morning, I decided to read the entry again in the light of day. Maybe I had imagined some details. But when I opened the desk drawer, the diary was on top of everything, sitting there like it was waiting. I unlocked it and flipped to that page. The text was still there, unchanged, but now there was more. Beneath the first paragraph, new sentences appeared. "He claims we share the same life. He even showed me his car keys and they match mine. I asked him where he lives and he described my apartment. I feel sick." I froze. I knew I hadn't written that. I hadn't even opened the diary during the night. I felt a cold tingle on the back of my neck. My mouth went dry. I checked the time on my phone and realized I was late for work, so I had to close the diary, toss it back into the drawer, and lock it again. All day I tried to ignore the weird feeling in my gut. I wanted to focus on spreadsheets and numbers, but my mind kept drifting to that text. Who wrote it? Why were they describing a situation that made no sense? That evening, I got home and hurried to my desk. My heart was racing. I unlocked the drawer and opened the diary. This time I found 3 new paragraphs. They described a conversation between me and someone else who looked exactly like me. The entries talked about feeling disoriented, about comparing identification cards, about noticing we had the same date of birth, the same job title, and the same brand of watch. My hands trembled. The handwriting was consistent, the same sharp letters. But the details were impossible. I had no twin. I had no meeting with anybody like that. I didn't know what to believe. I slammed the diary shut and stood there, breathing hard. My chest felt tight. The apartment was silent, but I heard the ticking of my old clock in the living room. The space felt heavier than usual. I wondered if I should call someone, but I didn't know who. I felt too embarrassed to share this story with a friend or coworker. They'd think I was messing with them or that I was losing it. So I tried an experiment. I tore out the pages that had the strange entries. I walked them over to the kitchen trash can and threw them out. Then I went back to the desk, locked the diary, and sat on my couch. My heart was pounding. I told myself that would solve it. Around midnight, I woke up to use the bathroom. I passed by the desk and saw the drawer sitting slightly open, though I was sure I locked it. I tugged it open the rest of the way and saw the diary on top. It looked intact. I flipped to the spot where I had torn out those pages. They were back, perfectly bound. I felt a surge of panic in my chest. My hands felt clammy. I ran my fingertips over the pages. No cuts, no wrinkles, nothing. The entries were there, exactly as before, and even more lines had appeared. They described me tearing out the pages. They described me throwing them in the trash. The text said, "He's trying to erase what's happening. It won't work." I shut the diary, hurried to my bedroom, and locked the door. I spent the night awake listening to every creak in the apartment. I couldn't concentrate on my usual tasks. I watched the shadows under the door. Sometimes I thought I heard footsteps in the hallway, but that might have been my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. By morning, I decided to get rid of the whole diary. I grabbed it, shoved it into a paper bag, and walked outside to my car. The sun was bright, and the sidewalk felt reassuring under my shoes. I drove to an empty parking lot behind a row of stores. My plan was to burn the diary and end this nightmare. I pulled out a small lighter from my glove box. I stepped outside the car, dropped the diary on the ground, and set it on fire. The flames curled around the cover and a bit of smoke rose. I kept looking around to see if anyone was watching, but the lot was empty. The diary burned completely. I stamped out the ashes, kicked them away, and felt a tiny wave of relief. I drove home with my windows down, hoping the fresh air would clear my nerves. When I got inside my apartment, I went straight to the desk to confirm the diary was gone. My stomach tightened when I saw it there, sitting upright on the surface. The cover had no burn marks. I picked it up and flipped through. All the entries were intact. My breathing grew shaky. My throat felt tight. I tried to steady myself by counting to 10, but my knees felt weak. Then I noticed more writing. The diary now included a new chapter describing the burning. It said, "He set me on fire. That proves he knows something is wrong. I'll show him what comes next." My eyes stung. I placed the diary back on the desk and backed away. My legs felt tense. My thoughts were racing and my chest hurt. I had no idea how to handle this. I decided to stay out of my apartment for the rest of the day. I grabbed my wallet, my phone, and my keys, and I left without locking the drawer. I spent hours walking around downtown, sitting in cafes, trying to distract myself with bland conversations at a coffee shop. The thought of the diary haunted me, but I didn't want to face it. Late that night, I forced myself to return. The building hallway was silent, and I could hear the hum of the elevator. My footsteps echoed as I approached my door. Inside, everything looked normal. I turned on every light. I checked each window. Then I walked to the desk. The diary was open, displaying a page filled with text. It described an encounter that I supposedly had in a different city. It mentioned streets I'd never visited and times that didn't match my schedule. It said I was talking to this other me, comparing notes on our lives and feeling disoriented. The final line read, "He can't escape what's coming." I felt a shiver in my arms. I dropped onto the chair, resting my elbows on the desk. My pulse hammered. The idea that there was another version of me somewhere else was terrifying. It didn't make any rational sense, but the diary seemed to believe it. Or maybe it was forcing me to believe in it. I touched the edges of the pages again. They felt smooth. The ink looked fresh, but the page was dry. There was no sign of a pen anywhere. I opened every drawer in the desk and looked behind the furniture. Nothing. For a while, I just sat there. My back ached, and my neck felt stiff from the tension. I decided to try one more strategy. Throw the diary in a dumpster far from my place. So around 2 a.m., I drove to the outskirts of town. I found a large dumpster behind a warehouse. It smelled like rotten leftovers, and the air was thick. I tossed the diary in and heard it land on metal. Then I drove away. The streets were empty. The sky was overcast, and a light drizzle dotted my windshield. I tried to focus on the sounds of the tires on the wet road, blocking out any thoughts about the diary. When I got back, the diary was waiting on my desk again. The cover was closed, and a pen rested on top. I had never seen that pen before. It was black, with no markings. I checked the clock on my phone. It was 2:43 a.m. My shoulders felt heavy. I opened the diary. There was another new entry. He threw me away. That won't help. He will soon see what I have seen. My mouth went dry. My temples throbbed. I slammed it shut and paced around the room. I turned on the TV to drown out my thoughts, but the images on the screen blurred as my mind raced. I was exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. Over the next 2 days, the diary gained more pages filled with these strange events. The entries described me traveling to unfamiliar places, talking to people I'd never met, and learning about a future I didn't want. Some lines mentioned an odd sense of merging timelines, as if this other me was crossing over. Every time I tried to destroy or discard the diary, it came back. Each time it returned, it included a detailed description of what I did and how it escaped my attempts to get rid of it. My heart felt like it was in a constant state of panic, and I noticed my hands shaking at random moments. I couldn't tell anyone about it. Who would believe me? I started setting alarms to catch the diary in the act of changing pages. I'd wake up every hour through the night and check. Every time I looked, the diary seemed unchanged. But in the morning, I'd discover brand new paragraphs had appeared. They always described events that never happened, at least never in my experience. But they involved me, or a version of me, leading a life that was both familiar and strange. I felt like I was sharing my existence with someone else. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked haggard. My skin was pale, with dark circles under my eyes. I hadn't eaten properly in days. Yesterday, I found a lengthy section about some final meeting between me and this other version of me. It said we talked for hours about the diary itself, about the nature of these late-night entries, and about a choice I would soon have to make. The entry claimed that if I refused that choice, something worse would happen. I don't know what that means. I only know that each time I open the diary, more text is there, detailing conversations I never had and places I've never been. I can't escape it. I'm writing all this now because I need to keep track of my own reality. I'm leaving this account as a record of what I can see and feel. My physical reactions, sweaty palms, pounding heart, shaky legs, are all I have to remind myself that I'm still me. I want to put the diary in a safe deposit box at some bank and never look at it again, but I suspect it won't matter. The diary will find its way back, it always does. I've tried fire, tearing, and throwing it in the trash. I've tried dumping it in random places. It keeps returning, always intact, always with more impossible entries. Right now it's on my desk again, closed, waiting. I'm scared to open it. My chest feels tight as I stand here, staring at that old cover. I want to run out the door and never return, but I know it wouldn't solve anything. The diary reappears wherever I go. There's no lock or trash can that can keep it away. I don't know where this is heading. I just know that each new page brings me closer to something I can't understand and don't want to face. I'm about to leave my apartment for a while and sit in my car. I need to breathe fresh air and clear my head. The diary will stay on the desk. When I come back, it might have more words inside. I can't fight it, I can't destroy it, and I can't let anyone else see it, because it keeps talking about a destiny I don't want to know. My only comfort is that nobody has gotten hurt, and I intend to keep it that way. I'll keep reading these entries, hoping there's a clue about how to stop this. I'm not sure what will happen next, but I know the diary will be here waiting. I can see it from where I stand, silent and still, holding a future I never chose. And I can't do a thing to make it disappear. never thought a single photo expedition could turn my stomach inside out. I never thought a quiet piece of countryside could make me shake when night fell. And I definitely never expected a hidden well to make me question my own sight. But that's exactly what happened 2 days ago when I stopped at that old place with a moss-covered well. I'm going to tell you what I saw, what I heard, and what I felt. I won't dress it up or spin some elegant story. This is exactly how it happened to me, step by step, from the moment I arrived until this very moment. I was driving through a remote back road. I'd been searching for unusual landscapes to photograph for a personal project. I had my camera in the passenger seat, some extra batteries in a small bag on the floor, and a thermos of coffee next to me. The road looked empty. No houses, no barns, no signs of life for miles. When I saw a small wooden sign that said Sitio do Padre in cracked paint, I pulled over. There was a dirt path leading into a bunch of tall trees. The sunlight was dropping behind me, and I thought the place might have an interesting look in the late afternoon. I parked near a sagging fence. The wood beams looked like they'd been there for decades, probably eaten away by termites. The fence surrounded a wide field. In the distance, I saw a small house, a stable, and a large overgrown garden. The garden had tall grass that reached my waist, weeds tangled around old structures. There was a huge oak tree leaning sideways near the stable. The only sound I heard was the buzzing of insects. No wind, no birds. I climbed over the fence, set my camera strap around my neck, and started walking. The air felt damp. It smelled like wet dirt and rotting wood. My boots sank in the mud with every step. In front of the stable, I noticed an old well. It was round, built with large stones. The top was covered in green moss. A broken pulley system hung over it. The rope was snapped and curled on the ground. My gut told me that well would make a great shot. The sunlight was hitting it at a slant, and I liked the eerie atmosphere. I raised my camera, adjusted the focus, and snapped a few pictures of the well from different angles. Then I walked closer, trying to get a good shot of the moss. Up close, the stones looked slimy, and the moss was slippery under my fingers when I touched it. I leaned over the edge of the well to check how deep it was. It looked pitch black. I felt a cold draft rising up from inside. I smelled stagnant water. I stood still for a moment. That's when I heard something. It was a faint whisper, like someone exhaling through their teeth. At first I thought it might be the wind passing through cracks in the stones. But there was no breeze on my face, and I swear I heard my name, just once, in the middle of that soft noise. My stomach did a quick flip. I jerked back and almost dropped my camera. I listened, but everything went silent again. I looked around and saw no one. I felt a wave of confusion. I checked my phone for signal. 0 bars. I told myself it was just a trick of the wind or some echo from the water. But I wanted proof, so I decided to record it. I switched my camera to video mode, leaned over the well, and started filming. I held the camera at arm's length, pointing it down into the darkness. My plan was to catch any sound coming out. I let the camera record. I tried to keep my breathing quiet. My arms trembled a bit. My shoulders were tense. I felt a chill on the back of my neck. After a minute or so, I thought I'd captured enough. I started to raise the camera back to look at the footage, but before the lens left the darkness, I saw a reflection. It was quick, just a flash. It looked like a face, but not mine. I saw the shape of eyes that didn't match my face. The mouth looked open, like it was gasping. I pulled the camera up and almost dropped it again. My hands were shaking. I switched off the recording and tried to calm my breathing. My heart was hammering in my chest. I glanced at the screen, expecting maybe a glitch or a weird lens flare. I was about to press playback, but the screen showed a flicker and then went dark. When I flipped the camera around to check the lens, I froze. The lens was covered in scratches, but from the inside. The outer glass was smooth. There were these jagged marks on the inside that looked deep, like something had gouged the interior elements. I couldn't believe it. I inspected it closely. The glass wasn't cracked on the outside. The scratches were internal, as if they'd been carved by a tiny blade scraping the inside of the lens. My mind raced. That made no sense. I felt nauseous. I turned around, scanned the area, and saw no one. Then I heard a wet noise in the well, like something shifting in water. It made me jump. I gripped my camera tight and left the well. I walked back to my car with my muscles wound up like springs. I kept glancing over my shoulder. The well was still there, silent. The stable looked empty. The house in the distance had boarded up windows. I decided I wouldn't stay. But as I reached the car, the sun was almost gone. I'd been walking around longer than I realized. I saw a small sign near the stable advertising lodging in a nearby farmhouse. It was hand-painted in large letters. I remember reading something about Hospadaria do Vilar. Maybe I missed it at the road. I got in the car and drove another mile or so. I found the farmhouse that the sign mentioned. A tall man with muddy boots greeted me. He said he had a spare room if I needed it. I paid in cash. He gave me a key. I didn't mention the well. I felt like no one would believe me. I carried my bag and camera inside. The room smelled musty, but I was too tired to care. I locked the door, kicked off my boots, and sat on the bed. My jeans were damp from the walk and my back ached. I tried to check the footage on my camera again. The device wouldn't turn on. The battery was still half full, so that shouldn't have been the issue. I plugged it into my charger, but nothing changed. The little power light wouldn't even blink. I felt anger rise in my chest. That camera wasn't cheap. I wanted to figure out what caused those scratches. I unscrewed the lens carefully. The back element was scratched too. The marks had a pattern I couldn't understand. They spiraled inward, almost like random lines crossing each other in a rough, ragged way. I touched them with a thin cloth. They were on the inside, out of reach. I set the camera aside. I needed to breathe. I checked the clock on the wall. It was around 9 p.m. I heard the faint sound of the farmhouse owner moving around outside, probably feeding the animals or locking up. I rubbed my eyes, then opened the window to get some air. Outside, the darkness was solid. There was a single light in the distance, probably from the stable or a neighbor's porch. The air smelled like rain was coming. I took a shower in a small bathroom attached to my room. The water pressure was low, and the hot water came and went. I tried to wash off the sweat and dirt from that day. My hands were shaking as I rinsed my hair. I kept seeing that face in my mind. Those eyes. That open mouth. It was wrong. Like it was twisted. I felt my throat tighten when I remembered the whisper. After my shower, I put on clean clothes and sat at a small desk in the room. I tried to clean the camera lens again. Nothing changed. Then I heard a soft sound outside. It was almost like a dripping noise, but heavier. Then a soft scraping like wet rubber against wood. My jaw clenched. I walked to the window and looked out. I didn't see anything. Then I heard it again, to my right, near the corner of the house. There was a slimy, slithering sound. Something was moving along the wall. I kept the lights off in my room, hoping I could see better outside. When my eyes adjusted, I thought I saw a faint shape against the wall near the roof. It looked like a long, dark smear, maybe a few feet wide. It clung to the side of the house. My breath came out in shallow bursts. I pressed my forehead against the window pane to get a closer look. The shape moved a bit. Its edges rippled. I noticed a dripping trail behind it. The surface reflected a bit of the moonlight. It was shiny, like a wet slug. I couldn't tell if it had limbs or a face. It just looked like a mass of darkness dragging itself upward. I backed away from the window. My throat felt dry. My heart pounded. I went to the door and locked it again, even though that wouldn't help if the thing tried to come in. I grabbed my phone. No signal. I turned on the flashlight app and pointed it at the window, but that only created glare on the glass. I wasn't ready to open the window. I just stood there trying to hear if it moved. Another few seconds passed. I heard a scraping on the roof. Then I heard a faint thump, like something shifting its weight on the shingles. I swallowed hard. I thought about screaming for the farmhouse owner, but I didn't want to make noise unless I was sure I needed to. My legs felt weak. I realized I was sweating again, even though the room was cold. I decided to check the hallway. I opened the door slowly. The hallway was dark, with only a small lamp at the far end. The floorboards creaked under my feet. I stepped forward, listening for anything on the roof. Everything was quiet for a few moments. I walked to the main living area of the farmhouse. The front door was locked and the windows were shut. I peeked through a window facing the driveway. I saw nothing but a parked truck and some trees. No shapes, no movement. I stood there, my chest tight, trying to decide what to do. Then I heard the farmhouse owner's voice in another room. He was humming, maybe in the kitchen. I walked in that direction. When he saw me, he nodded and asked if everything was okay. I didn't want to sound crazy. I just asked if there were large animals around here that climbed on roofs. He gave me a confused look and shook his head, said maybe a stray cat or a wild raccoon, but nothing bigger. I nodded, thanked him, and went back to my room. When I returned, I looked around the walls and ceiling. I didn't see any wet spots or dripping slime. The window was closed, the curtains drawn. I switched on the overhead light. The bright glow made me feel a little better. I stood by the window for a minute, listening. Everything was quiet. No scraping, no whispering. I exhaled slowly and tried to calm down. Maybe I'd imagined the shape. But my mind went back to that well. That face, those scratches inside my camera lens. I decided to do a final check outside before trying to sleep. I grabbed my flashlight, took a deep breath, and opened the bedroom door. The hallway still looked the same. I walked to the back door, unlatched it, and stepped onto the porch. The night air was cold and smelled like wet grass. I shone the flashlight around, sweeping it across the walls of the farmhouse. No sign of anything. I aimed it up at the roof. I didn't see anything there either. I walked around to the side of the building. My flashlight beam landed on the siding. There were thin streaks of something dark and wet. They trailed up the wall to the roof. My stomach turned. The streaks looked fresh, and I saw droplets sliding down. I reached out and touched one with my fingertip. It was thick, cold, and smelled stale. My skin crawled. I wiped my finger on my jeans and stepped back. I felt like a lump of ice had formed in my gut. I wanted to shout for the owner, but I held back. I took another step forward and tried to see where the streaks led on the roof. I couldn't angle the flashlight properly to see the top. My imagination started going wild. I saw movement in the corner of my eye and swung the flashlight around. Nothing. My chest tightened even more. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. A mosquito buzzed near my face, and I almost dropped the flashlight when I jerked away. That was enough. I went back inside, locked the door, and hurried to my room. Once inside, I shoved a chair under the doorknob. Then I sat on the bed with my back against the headboard, hugging my camera bag. I couldn't relax. My mind played the scene from the well over and over. The reflection, the scratching sounds, the lens destroyed from the inside. And now something wet and cold was crawling around the farmhouse walls. I didn't sleep well. Every few minutes I thought I heard scraping noises or dripping sounds. I dozed off around 4 in the morning. When I woke up, the sun was shining through the curtain cracks. I got out of bed slowly, my body stiff from tension. I peeked outside. The wet streaks were still there, dried up into dark lines on the siding. I packed my things as fast as I could. I didn't want to stay any longer. I paid the owner for the night and got in my car. I didn't mention the streaks. I didn't show him my camera lens. I just wanted to leave. I glanced back at the building as I pulled out. Those dark lines were still on the wall. They looked like something had climbed up to the roof and vanished. Now I'm on the road, heading as far away from that place as I can. I tried once more to power on my camera at a rest stop, but it's completely dead. The scratches remain. They look like they were carved by tiny claws, and I can't stop thinking about that face in the well. I felt it staring back at me, even though it was just a reflection. But it wasn't mine. I told this story exactly how it happened. There's no fancy language here, no deep analysis. I don't have a logical explanation. I don't have any more details. I only know what I saw and what I felt. I'm planning to drive back to the city and get my camera checked, maybe replace the lens. But I don't think I'll ever be comfortable leaning over a well again, especially not in an isolated place. And every time I close my eyes, I imagine a slow, wet shape crawling up the side of a building, leaving those cold streaks behind. I hate that I can't forget it. I hate that I can't prove it. But I saw it. I heard it. And my camera lens is still ruined from the inside. I woke up in a cold sweat on the first night I put that painting in my house. My heart pounded against my ribs and I felt a dull ache in my forehead. I turned on the lamp beside my bed, rubbed my eyes and tried to focus. I felt uneasy, but I couldn't say why. I sat there for a minute, breathing through my mouth. Then I got up and walked into the living room. The place was dark, and the streetlight outside gave everything a pale orange tint. I didn't see any movement, but I sensed something off near the collection of paintings I had inherited. I recently took possession of about a dozen old paintings from a relative I never met in person. A lawyer contacted me to say that I was the only living heir who could take them. I thought it sounded strange, but I agreed. These paintings came in a large wooden crate, packed in straw and wrapped in thick paper. Most were landscapes with faded colors, but there was one portrait that made me pause. I could see a man dressed in formal clothing that seemed several centuries old, but his face was smeared or blurred. It looked as if someone had wiped away the paint around the eyes and mouth, leaving this weird haze. The rest of the painting was detailed, showing buttons on the jacket, a thick collar, and a slight background of a dark room. But his face was a blank. It bothered me. On the first day I had it, I placed the portrait against the wall in my living room. I wanted to examine it more closely later, maybe figure out if the damage was caused by age or something else. My plan was to either keep it in storage or see if it had any value to a collector. I wasn't comfortable hanging it on the wall, so I kept it on the floor, leaning against a cabinet. The eyes were gone. The nose was just a faint bump. The mouth was a pale smear. It gave me a strange feeling whenever I looked at it. That night I struggled to sleep. I didn't hear any footsteps or voices, but I kept imagining the face in that painting coming into focus. My mind was restless. I'd stare at the ceiling, close my eyes, try to slow my breathing. Around 3 in the morning, I finally drifted off, only to wake up again feeling tense. I walked to the living room in my pajamas. I stood near the painting and flipped on the overhead light. At first it looked the same. Then I leaned in. I thought I saw faint lines where there hadn't been any before. Right around the brow there was a hint of shape. It wasn't much, just the impression of a ridge. I stepped back, rubbed my hand over my mouth and flicked the light off. I told myself I was imagining things. I decided to go back to bed. The next morning, I checked the painting again in daylight. I didn't notice much of a difference. The face was still incomplete, but I found myself paying more attention to the texture. There was a small raised area on the left side of what should be the forehead. That area felt dry, but it had a slight shine under strong light. I ran my fingertips over it. I felt a bump. I had no explanation, so I shrugged and left it alone. I went about my day, trying to focus on usual tasks. I ran errands, did some cleaning, and tried to organize the other paintings. Most of them were of old castles, thick forests, or farmland under cloudy skies. They seemed boring to me, but I wanted to handle them carefully in case there was some antique value. By late afternoon, I was exhausted. I made some coffee and stood in the kitchen, staring into the living room. The portrait was still there. I heard the faint hum of the refrigerator. Otherwise, silence. The sun was setting and an orange glare lit the painting. I squinted and stepped closer. There was something new around the mouth area. It looked darker, as if the paint had deepened in color. I picked up the painting and carried it to the window. I tilted it under the light. I saw the suggestion of lips, maybe just a faint outline. My pulse sped up. I wanted to brush it off, so I set it down and tried not to think about it. That night, I sat on the couch, watching television with the sound low. I kept glancing at the painting. It was near the corner of my vision. I had placed it against the wall again, but it seemed to lean forward more than before. At around 11, I stood up, grabbed a large gray throw blanket, and draped it over the painting. I felt relief when I couldn't see it anymore. The blanket covered the entire frame. I told myself I'd deal with it in the morning. Maybe I'd take it to an antique shop, see if it was worth fixing or selling. I clicked off the lights in the living room and went to bed. I slept better. I still had some odd dreams, mostly about the painting, but nothing that startled me awake. When I got up the next day, I walked into the living room with a cup of coffee. The blanket wasn't on the painting anymore. It was on the floor, crumpled next to the coffee table. The painting faced me. The face in the painting wasn't blank. I saw an outline of eyes, a nose, and lips. They were faded and uncertain, but they were there. The face didn't look like a normal human face. There was something twisted in the way the mouth curved. I could see that the corners of the lips turned upward, but the eyes were still incomplete. It made me feel short of breath. I rubbed my temples and set my coffee down. I felt a chill and realized the windows were all closed. There was no wind. Nothing in the house seemed disturbed. The painting seemed to be the only thing that had changed. My hands were sweaty, and I wiped them on my pants. I tried to calm down. I walked over to the blanket on the floor and picked it up. It felt normal. No tears or stains. I tossed it on the couch. I checked the painting's surface. The paint was dry, but my eyes told me something had shifted. I remembered the shape of the mouth from before. It had been just a hint of a line. Now it was a curling shape that suggested a sneer. I felt queasy. I decided to move the painting into a spare room and close the door. I didn't want to look at it. I carried it carefully, avoiding eye contact with that face, even though the eyes weren't fully formed. Then I closed the door and walked away, breathing quickly. I felt my heart rate pick up. I forced myself to eat breakfast. The eggs tasted bland, and I kept glancing at the hallway. For most of that day, I tried to ignore the painting. I told myself I was jumping at shadows. I did some chores. I vacuumed the living room, wiped the shelves, and tried to keep my mind occupied. Every so often, I'd hear a faint creak in the direction of the spare room. I started to wonder if the painting was shifting again. I told myself it was the house settling. I tried to focus on the hum of the vacuum and the smell of dust. Around mid-afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked to the spare room door. It was shut. The air in the hallway felt cooler than the rest of the house. I gripped the doorknob. It felt cold. I turned it and entered the room. The painting was upright against the wall. I hadn't left it that way. I was sure I had leaned it flat against a small dresser. Now it stood several inches away, as though it had been propped up. I walked closer and felt a knot in my stomach. The face looked more detailed. The eyes had a shape, and I could see narrow pupils. The nose was sharper. The corners of the mouth curved higher, almost in an expression of glee. It reminded me of my own face when I force a smile, but it was twisted. I felt the hair on my arm stand up. My heart pounded in my ears. I reached out and pushed the painting flat against the dresser again, so the top wouldn't tilt forward. Then I left the room and locked the door. I didn't even know why I locked it, but I felt safer that way. I went to the kitchen, drank water, and stared at the clock. My hands trembled. I wasn't sure what to do. Throw it away? Burn it? But I had no proof of anything supernatural. It was just a painting, wasn't it? Night came. I turned on every light in the house, including lamps in the hallway. I tried to watch a comedy show on TV to distract myself. Around midnight, I heard a thud from the spare room. It made me jump. I turned the volume off on the TV and listened. My pulse hammered in my chest. I walked down the hallway with slow steps, feeling the floor creak under my feet. I reached the spare room door and placed my ear against it. I heard nothing except my breath. After a moment, I gathered my courage and unlocked the door. The painting was on the ground, face down. There was no sign of damage to the dresser or anything else. I crouched and lifted it by the edges. The face was visible again, but now it resembled my features in a vague way. The cheekbones were higher, the jawline was narrower, and the eyes were shaped in a way that made me think of my reflection in a mirror. But the mouth was wrong. It had a wide grin, and the teeth looked pointed. I blinked a few times, trying to make sense of it. I felt a rush of panic. I wanted to cover it again, but I was afraid it wouldn't do any good. I decided to bring it back to the living room. I carried it carefully, feeling my skin crawl. I set it against a wall and stood back. My reflection in the TV screen showed me hunched with sweat on my forehead as I stared at that painting. The figure in the portrait looked at me. The eyes seemed fixed on mine. I swallowed hard. I didn't want to leave it alone. I also didn't want to stay there. I thought about calling someone, maybe a friend or a neighbor. But what would I say? I was rattled. My phone felt heavy in my pocket, and I pulled it out, scrolled through my contacts, then locked it again. I didn't want to sound paranoid. I walked over to the painting, reached for it, then changed my mind. I paced around the living room, clenching my fists. I turned off the TV and listened to the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I decided to try covering the painting again with the blanket. My hands shook as I placed the blanket over the frame, making sure it was fully covered. Then I grabbed some tape from a drawer and used several pieces to secure the blanket's edges. I wanted to see if it would stay in place until morning. I breathed out, feeling a bit more at ease. I switched off the living room light and went to my bedroom. I locked the door from the inside. I climbed into bed, listening to my own heartbeat. I stared at the ceiling until I dozed off. When I opened my eyes the next day, I felt dread. I didn't want to check the living room, but I had to. I forced myself out of bed and walked down the hall. My footsteps felt heavy. The living room was chilly, and the blanket was on the couch. The painting stood there, uncovered. I noticed tape on the floor, each strip curled or torn, as if peeled off. The painting's face now had full eyes, and they resembled my eyes. The iris color, the shape, the angle, they looked exactly like mine. But they had no warmth. The mouth was parted, and there were smudges of white where teeth should be. I felt my heart drop. My hands went numb. I backed away. I kept shaking my head. I grabbed the painting and considered throwing it outside, but I hesitated. I stared at the face. I saw a reflection of my own fear in those eyes. My mouth was dry. I tried to calm my breathing. I set the painting down and paced around, uncertain. I felt pressure in my chest. My thoughts were jumbled. I considered carrying it to the garage, but I felt too rattled to move it again. I stood there for a long time, staring at my own distorted features in that painting. There was no one else in the house. I realized I couldn't just live with it. I took a few steps back. My stomach churned, and I felt sweat on my face. The grin on the painting seemed deeper than before. It made me want to look away, but I couldn't. I turned to the window, noticing the daylight outside. Then I glanced at the painting again, unsettled by how it seemed to watch me. I walked to the kitchen and poured water into a glass, but I couldn't drink it. My hands were shaking too much. I set the glass down, took a few deep breaths, and tried to clear my head. My heart wouldn't slow down. The sense of being watched felt overwhelming. I could feel eyes on my back, even though I had left the painting in the living room. I stepped back into the living room. The painting hadn't moved, but those eyes seemed to follow me. The corners of the mouth were turned up in a horrible smile. My jaw tightened. I wanted to look away, but I forced myself to approach it. I reached out and brushed my finger along the paint. It was still dry, but the lines felt raised and solid. I jerked my hand back. My heart pounded again. I couldn't stay near it. I decided I'd call someone to pick it up, or maybe I'd drive it to a local antique dealer. My phone battery was in the red. I walked to my bedroom to grab the charger, and that's where I am now, writing this down, feeling a heaviness in my chest. I hear small noises coming from the living room. They sound like the shifting of a frame against the wall. I don't want to go back out there yet. My door is closed and I feel a chill in the air. My heart is racing and my breath is shallow. I keep expecting to hear another thud or scrape. I can't shake the feeling that the painting wants me to see it again, that it's drawing me back into the living room. My mind is scattered, but I'm focused on one clear plan. I need to get rid of that thing. I'm not waiting for another night with it in my home. I remember getting the camera in a plain cardboard box with no card attached. It was at my office, on top of my desk, right next to a stack of old case files. The box had been sealed with clear tape, and someone had written my name on it in thick black marker. I was in the middle of checking phone messages, so I opened the box without giving it much thought. When I pulled the camera out, I realized it was some sort of vintage model. It had a heavy metal casing and a worn leather strap that looked like it had been handled by 100 different people over the years. I'm a private investigator, and people leave strange items for me sometimes, hoping I'll find something interesting or help them track down its origins. I assumed this was another odd job. I had no idea it would change the way I look at every photograph I take. I'm not a believer in the supernatural. I investigate insurance fraud, cheating spouses, and missing assets. Those are the things I deal with day in and day out. I've never believed in ghosts, curses, or haunted objects. When people mention that stuff, I usually nod and move on. But I'm not going to lie. There was something unsettling about that camera. It felt heavier than it looked, like it was weighed down by more than just metal and glass. The lens had small scratches around the edges, and the viewfinder was cloudy in one corner. The label on the bottom was half peeled off. The only legible text read M Photoworks, and some serial number that was too faded to read. I took a closer look. The camera used standard 35mm film, but the spool loading system was slightly different from the modern ones I'd seen. I found a roll of film in the box too. It was sealed, and the writing on the canister looked foreign, maybe German or Russian. I checked the piece of paper that came with it. It just said, "A rare find. Enjoy." No signature, no date, nothing else. I shrugged and tossed it in a drawer. That week, I was working a case involving a warehouse break-in. I had been hired to document evidence of repeated trespassing, so I needed photos of footprints, pry marks on the door, and any damage inside. Usually, I use a reliable digital camera because I can see the shots right away. But something made me take the vintage camera instead. I guess I wanted to see if it worked. I bought a few rolls of normal 35mm film from a local shop, loaded one into the camera, and spent half an hour shooting the interior of the warehouse. I took pictures of scattered debris, scratches on the walls, and the broken lock on the main door. I didn't notice anything unusual in the viewfinder, other than the slight blur at the edge. I figured I'd get them developed later. I dropped the film off at a small photo lab down the street from my apartment. The place is run by an older guy named Frank. He's been developing photos since I was a kid, and he knows his stuff. When I went back to pick them up, he gave me a curious look as he handed over the envelope. I asked him if everything turned out okay, and he just shrugged. He said the negatives looked fine, but the prints had some kind of distortion in a few frames. I assumed it was the camera's fault. Maybe the lens was scratched or the shutter was sticking. I drove home and opened the envelope on my kitchen table. That's when I felt a chill run up my neck. I spread the prints out and saw something in about half of them. In one photo, near the corner of the shot, I could make out a vague shape that looked like a person. It was transparent, like a silhouette made of fog. In another photo, I saw two shapes in the background, both covered by what looked like dark, ragged hoods. Their faces were hidden, and they seemed to be standing behind a metal shelf that I knew had been empty. None of that was visible when I took the pictures. At first, I thought maybe someone had walked into the frame, but the shapes didn't look normal. They looked stretched and bent, as if they had been squeezed into the space. My hands felt clammy. I took a moment to breathe. Then I looked at the rest of the prints. In several shots, I saw these twisted outlines or shadowy figures, each in a slightly different position. They were never in focus, and they all looked like they were leaning or crouching at odd angles. I'm a skeptic, so my first guess was that the camera was broken. I double-checked the prints. I couldn't explain it with normal light leaks or double exposures. The shapes looked more deliberate, almost posed. I put the prints back in the envelope and told myself it was just a malfunction. The next morning, I went back to the warehouse and used my regular digital camera. I took the exact same shots from the same angles. The digital photos turned out normal. No weird shapes, no shadows, nothing out of the ordinary. I still felt uneasy, but I didn't want to jump to any wild conclusions. The next weekend, I had another surveillance job at a small motel on the outskirts of town. I wanted to stay low profile, so I set up a vantage point near the parking lot. Around sundown, I realized I'd left my digital camera in the trunk, but I had the vintage one on the passenger seat. I loaded it with a fresh roll of film and took a few shots of a suspect entering a room. I didn't notice anything strange at the time, just a cheap motel with flickering neon lights. I finished the roll the next morning and dropped it off at the same photo lab. Frank gave me the same puzzled look when I picked them up later that afternoon. When I examined the photos in my car, I saw that the first half-dozen frames looked normal. Just a man walking, an old motel sign, a car parked near the entrance. But in the later shots, I saw more of those shadows. This time they looked closer to the foreground. One was near a stairwell, hunched against the wall. Another was near the suspect's car, bent forward in a way that made my stomach tense up. It had arms that looked too long for its body. I set the photos down on the passenger seat. My hands were shaking a little. I tried to calm myself by thinking about how film can be ruined by random light leaks or processing errors, but part of me knew that this didn't look like a normal glitch. It looked like something, had been in the frame. Over the next few weeks, I got busy with several new cases. I kept using the vintage camera on and off because I was curious. Each time I developed a roll, I spotted those shadows again. Sometimes they were translucent silhouettes that looked vaguely human. Other times they appeared as twisted creatures with contorted limbs. They were never in a place where a normal person would stand. Sometimes they showed up near a ceiling or halfway behind a wall. I caught myself rubbing my eyes every time I looked at these pictures. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was right there in front of me. And each time, the figures seemed to move closer to the main subject of the photo. It was as if they were trying to get to me. One night I was back at my office going through the prints from the day's surveillance. It was late, maybe 10 o'clock, and the building was quiet. I had a small desk lamp on and I was flipping through the photos one by one. I noticed a progression in the last roll. The first image showed one dark hooded figure at the far edge of the shot. The second showed two silhouettes, a bit closer. In the third, they were nearly in the center of the frame, closer to the camera than the person I'd been photographing. By the fourth photo, I could see a shape that looked like an arm or a hand stretching out. It had a long, thin outline with fingers splayed at awkward angles. I got goosebumps all over my arms. I pushed my chair back, trying to create some space between me and those images. I felt a sudden urge to check my window. My office is on the third floor and the blinds were up. I glanced outside and didn't see anything but the empty parking lot. Then I focused on the last print in the stack. My stomach lurched. The background of that photo had a reflection in a window, and in that reflection I saw what looked like a face with empty eye sockets. It was right behind me, but that didn't make sense because I was the one taking the picture. I rubbed my forehead. My heart was pounding. I checked the time. It was 10:15 p.m. I decided to lock up and go home. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept going back to the face in the reflection. I replayed the moment I took that shot. I remembered standing outside a small office building, focusing on a client who was walking in. There hadn't been anyone behind me. I was alone on that sidewalk. I stared at my ceiling for a while, hearing my own heartbeat and the hum of traffic outside. Eventually, I dozed off. The next day, I tried to get rid of the camera. I placed it back in its box and drove to a pawn shop across town. The owner tested the shutter and said he wouldn't give me much for it. I didn't care. I just wanted it off my hands. But while he was examining the camera, I realized I couldn't explain why it scared me. I only had those weird prints as proof, but that wouldn't convince a pawn shop owner. He offered me a small amount of cash. I almost took it, but I hesitated. Part of me wanted to keep investigating the camera, to figure out if there was a rational explanation. I told him I'd think about it and drove off with the camera still on my passenger seat. Over the next few days, I promised myself I wouldn't use it, but I still had new film rolls in my office, and I'm stubborn. I took the camera along on another case, telling myself I'd only take a few shots to see if the distortions kept happening. I staked out a suburban house waiting to catch a subject coming home late. The street was quiet. There were streetlights along the sidewalk, and a few cars passed by every hour. I took some pictures of the driveway, the mailbox, and the windows. Nothing unusual, just typical documentation. I dropped the film off at Frank's lab, trying to act normal, but he gave me a wary look again. Later that night, I got a call from Frank, something he never does. He sounded uneasy. He said, "I finished your photos. You should come get them." I asked him if everything was okay. He just said, "I don't want them here overnight." I drove to the lab. When I walked in, I saw he had my prints spread out on the counter. He pointed to a sequence of 4 shots. In each shot, I could see the same hooded figure, but this time it was right in front of the subject's bedroom window. The figure's face was turned to the camera, but the hood was covering most of it. All I could really see was darkness. In the last photo, the figure had stepped away from the window and was standing near a bush in the yard. It seemed to be looking toward the street. Frank told me the negatives showed no signs of tampering. He refused payment for the development. He just said, "Take them and go." I left the lab and drove straight to my office. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I turned on every light in the office when I got there. I spread the new prints on my desk along with the older ones. I studied them side by side. The positions of these shapes, silhouettes, and hooded figures were never random. They seemed to shift closer to me over time. I felt my throat tighten. I looked up at my window. It was dark outside, and I saw my reflection in the glass. I walked over and lowered the blinds. I didn't want to see anything outside. I paced around my office, trying to figure out what was happening. My head was pounding. I thought about the night I first got the camera. I had never seen who left it there. I didn't know where it came from. I considered calling the police, but I knew I had nothing they would take seriously. No one had been hurt. Nothing had been stolen. I had just taken some strange photos. I wasn't even sure if I believed in them myself. I didn't sleep in my apartment that night. I stayed in my office, kept the lights on, and dozed off in my chair around 3 a.m. At some point, a noise startled me, a scrape against the window. I snapped awake. My heart was racing. I stood up, braced myself, and took a step toward the blinds. My mouth felt dry. I raised one slat with my finger and peeked outside. For a second, I thought I saw a dark shape on the fire escape. It looked like part of a large coat or cloak fluttering in the breeze. Then it was gone. I stood there, breathing fast, telling myself it was my eyes playing tricks on me. I stayed by the window for a few minutes, just listening. The street was quiet except for an occasional car. I locked the window and sat down again. By morning, I decided to keep the camera locked in a safe. I told myself I wouldn't use it anymore, but I also felt like I couldn't throw it away. Something told me that if I just got rid of it, I'd never know if it was really the camera causing these images, or if something else was going on. Maybe I'm being paranoid, or maybe something is attached to that camera. Either way, I see those silhouettes in my mind now. I catch myself glancing at every photo I take, even on my phone, checking if I can spot a hooded shape or a contorted limb lurking in the background. For now, I keep my office blinds shut. I work cases during the day and I try not to stay too late. When I do, I avoid looking out the windows unless I have to. I don't know if these things are real or if I'm losing my grip on reality. But every time I look at those prints, I feel that same tightness in my gut. That camera is in my safe and I can sense its weight behind the locked metal door. Sometimes I swear I can hear faint clicks coming from inside, like the shutter snapping on its own. I try to ignore it, but the echo of it never leaves my head. And at night, when I'm alone in my office, I remember the shapes in those photographs and wonder if they're getting closer, step by step, each time I dare to look through that lens. I've never been a nervous driver, but tonight feels different right from the start. I'm a sales rep and I spend a lot of time on the road. I drive at night so I can make it to early morning appointments in different cities. My car is usually reliable, and I'm used to covering long distances. I've seen flat tires, engine trouble, flooded roads, and all sorts of weird stuff at rest stops. But I've never gone through anything like what happened tonight. I can't shake the feeling that something's wrong. My stomach is tense and my hands feel clammy on the steering wheel. I keep looking at the clock on the dashboard, but I'm not sure if it's helping. The numbers are moving forward, but it feels like I'm stuck. I've been driving for a few hours. The highway is mostly empty. The headlights show a narrow path in front of me, and beyond that is just black. Sometimes a random vehicle passes in the opposite direction, but it's been a while since I've seen anyone going the same way as me. The radio is on, but the signal is weak, and all I get is static or faint stations that fade in and out. The night is quiet except for the sound of my tires on the asphalt and the occasional gust of wind that pushes against my car. I notice something odd around 2 in the morning. I see a dead tree on the right side of the road. It's tall and twisted, and it stands out because there aren't many trees around here. I glance at it for a second, feel a slight chill, then keep driving. After about 30 minutes, I see another tree that looks exactly the same. It's the same shape, the same height, the same broken branches. At first I think maybe I'm just tired and imagining stuff, so I keep going. I don't pull over. I tell myself I must have seen a tree that just looks similar. But then I see a crooked road sign. The sign leans to the left and has some old graffiti on it. I pass it, keep going, and maybe 20 minutes later I see the same sign again. I'm sure it's the same one because the graffiti is identical. Same faded letters and the same shape. My stomach tightens. I lean forward, gripping the wheel, and look around. The darkness outside is total. The headlights only show about 30 feet in front of me. I slow down, checking the gas gauge. Strangely, the gauge still shows a little over half a tank. I've already driven enough to lose more than that, but the needle hasn't moved much. It's like my car isn't burning fuel the way it should. This doesn't calm me down. It makes me feel worse. My chest feels tight and my fingertips are cold. I keep checking the rearview mirror, but there's nothing behind me except darkness. The road is empty as far as I can see. I push on. I want to find an exit, a rest stop, anything that's well lit or has other people around. The miles keep passing, but I don't see any signs for gas stations or towns. All I see is that same dead tree again, and that same crooked sign. Sometimes I also pass a fallen utility pole lying on the shoulder. The metal parts at the top are twisted. After seeing that pole for the 3rd time, I start to panic. My breathing speeds up, and I grip the steering wheel so hard that my knuckles hurt. I turn off the radio because the static is getting on my nerves. Now the only sound is the car's engine and the tires against the road. I check my phone, but I have no signal. I try to call my boss to let him know I'm stuck, but the call fails. There are no text messages coming in, nothing. I toss the phone onto the passenger seat. Time moves on. I look at the dashboard clock. 3:12 a.m. 10 minutes later, I look again. 3:41 a.m. It feels like time is moving fast, but I'm not getting anywhere. I should have passed some town by now. I should have run into a truck stop or one of those roadside diners. Instead, it's more endless highway with repeating landmarks. My eyes sting, and I realize I haven't blinked much. I force myself to blink a few times and roll down the window a bit to let in some fresh air. The breeze hits my face and it's chilly. My skin tingles. I can smell asphalt and dust. As I keep driving, the steering wheel starts vibrating. It's a weird shudder that comes and goes. It feels like something is hitting the underside of the car. I ease off the accelerator. The vibration stops for a moment, then starts up again. It's almost like a tapping or knocking from underneath. My shoulders tense and I feel a knot in my throat. I try to ignore it, but it's impossible. Every few seconds I hear a dull thud that makes the steering wheel tremble. I think about pulling over, but I'm afraid I'll get stuck if the car dies on me. However, the car's engine sounds normal when I press on the gas. The engine temperature is normal, and no warning lights appear on the dashboard. Yet the vibration persists. I keep checking the gas gauge and it's barely moved. I've traveled many miles since I last checked, so it should be dropping. But it isn't. It's almost like the tank is stuck at around half. The highway signs, the dead tree, the crooked sign, and the fallen pole cycle through my vision again. By now, I've counted 5 or 6 repeats. My breathing is shallow, my hands are sweaty, and my shirt is sticking to my back. I consider turning around, but the idea of reversing direction in the middle of the night on a highway that might be messing with me doesn't seem like a good plan. Also, every time I look in the rearview mirror, I see nothing but darkness. It's not normal darkness. It's thick, and it seems like the road is gone behind me. My arms feel weak and I'm starting to tremble. My legs feel restless. I slam my palm on the steering wheel in frustration, but it doesn't help. The thumping under the car is getting more frequent. The overhead light flickers a bit, even though it's switched off. I can see it flash in the corners of my eyes. I try tapping the dome light switch, but that doesn't stop the flicker. I clear my throat and mutter to myself, just to hear a voice. My own words come out shaky. I'm not sure if I'm just tired or if something is actually wrong with the car, or with the road, or with me. Finally, after seeing the same sign for the 7th or 8th time, I decide to pull over. I can't keep driving in circles. I slow down and guide the car onto the shoulder. The engine idles quietly. The steering wheel vibration lessens but doesn't go away. My heart is beating fast. I turn on the hazard lights, but they don't seem to light up the area behind me very well. It's like the darkness is eating the red flashes. When I look back, I can't see the road surface. It's just black. I put the car in park. My breath is uneven. I open the door and the interior light flickers. I step out. The air is cold on my arms. I stand there looking around. The headlights shine forward, showing the shoulder and some of the asphalt ahead. The dead tree is in the distance on the right side. The crooked sign is maybe 100 yards ahead. The fallen pole is farther up on the left side. Everything is quiet, except for a gentle wind that rustles the tall grass by the road. Then I hear a faint whisper. It's not the wind. It sounds like voices. My neck tingles. I look around, but I don't see anyone. The whispers get a bit louder. I can't make out words. Just that low, soft sound of multiple voices. I walk toward the front of the car and pop the hood. I grip the hood release handle and lift it slowly. My hands are shaking. I hold the hood up and peer inside. The engine looks normal. There's no smoke, no smell of burnt oil, and no sign of fluid leaking. I touch a few parts and they're warm. Everything seems in place. Suddenly, I hear a sharp tap from underneath the engine block. It's like something hits the metal from inside. I jerk my hand back. The hair on my arms stands up. My mouth goes dry. I lower the hood carefully and let it click shut. I move to the driver's side door, about to get back in, when I hear the whispers again. This time, I can pick out a few words. Don't look behind you. It's a breathy voice, like someone speaking through clenched teeth. I freeze. My heart is pounding so hard that I can feel it in my ears. My first instinct is to turn around, but I fight it. I focus on the driver's door handle. The whispers repeat, more urgent now. Don't look behind you. I taste fear in my mouth. My hands are sweaty and my legs feel like they might give out. I stand there facing the car. The highway behind me is still dark. The hazard lights are on, but I can't see them reflecting off anything. It's like there's a black void behind the trunk. The whispers continue. They seem to circle around me, like they're on every side. But I don't turn. I lean forward, open the car door, and slip into the seat. I slam the door shut and lock it. The engine is still running and the dash lights are steady. I grab the steering wheel, breathing hard. For a few seconds, I can't do anything. My mind races. I keep my eyes locked on the windshield, not daring to check the mirrors. That phrase echoes in my head. Don't look behind you. Eventually, I press the accelerator again. The car moves forward, the tires crunching on the shoulder until I ease back onto the road. The hazard lights click off and I drive straight, watching the headlights. The vibrations return. Now they feel stronger, like heavy knocks under the floorboards. I try to ignore them, but every jolt makes my teeth rattle. My foot is shaky on the gas pedal. I'm fighting the urge to look in the rearview mirror, but the corner of my eye catches the reflection of something I can't describe. I feel my chest tighten, and I grip the wheel even harder. As I continue, I see the same dead tree on the right side again. The sign is up ahead and the fallen pole is to the left. My eyes sting with tears of frustration. I just want to get out of here. The speedometer reads 60 miles an hour, but the landmarks are repeating in the same sequence as if I'm stuck in a loop. The clock on the dashboard shows 4:22 a.m., then 4:23, then 4:24. Time is moving, but the road seems endless. The fuel gauge is still stuck near half. It refuses to go down. My legs feel weak and my mouth is dry. I'm pressing on the gas pedal, yet I feel like I'm not getting any farther. The knocks under the car are erratic. Sometimes they're rapid, sometimes spaced out. Each one feels like a punch to my gut. I clench my teeth. The fear is almost overwhelming, but I won't stop again. Stopping made the whispers louder. I don't want to hear them anymore. I just want daylight, other cars on the road, or a familiar highway exit. My face is damp with sweat. The darkness around me seems thicker than before. The beams of the headlights look dimmer. I blink a few times, thinking my eyes are playing tricks on me. I lean forward over the wheel, trying to squeeze out any extra bit of visibility. The road stretches on. Another pass by the dead tree, then the crooked sign, then the fallen pole. It's the same pattern in the same order. I don't see any break, no difference in the terrain. The grass on the sides of the highway is the same color. The sky is moonless and the stars are dim. I risk a quick glance at the rearview mirror. I just see blackness. The reflection of my own eyes flashes, and I think I see something move in the back seat. But it's gone when I look directly. My ears pound. My breathing is ragged. I face forward again, and my vision blurs for a moment. I realize I'm so tense that my neck hurts. I try to loosen up, but the tension stays. My heart keeps racing and my stomach is in knots. The hours go by. The clock reads 5:15 a.m., then 5:30, then 5:45. I still don't see any sign of dawn. No hint of a lighter sky. I keep driving in a straight line. The car shows no signs of stopping. The engine hums, steady as ever. The gas needle hasn't budged. I swallow hard. My throat is sore, and my lips are cracked. Another pass by the same tree. The sign, the pole. I lose count of how many times I've seen them. My vision swims and my eyelids are heavy, but I can't stop. I'm too afraid of what might happen if I pull over again. I'm trapped in this loop with no exit. I grip the wheel and press the accelerator a bit more, trying to force something to change. The car speeds up, but the landmarks pop up again. The sign, the tree, the pole. The knocks under the car grow louder and faster with my increased speed. My chest aches. Every muscle in my body is wound tight. I slam my fist on the dashboard, letting out a grunt. The sound bounces off the empty interior. Then I hear it once more, a whisper floating around me. Don't look behind you. The voice sounds close, like it's coming from right next to my ear. I keep my eyes on the road, my chin up, not daring to glance to the side. I can't see anyone in my peripheral vision, but I feel a presence. My skin crawls. My heart pounds so hard that I can feel it in my temples. I focus on keeping the car straight, on staying in my lane. on not giving in to the urge to look back. The words repeat, sometimes louder, sometimes softer, overlapping each other in waves. I don't know how to break this loop. I just keep driving, hoping eventually the sun will rise or I'll find a real exit with lights and people. My clothes are damp with sweat, and my head throbs. The knocks under the car won't stop, but the engine keeps going. The fuel gauge stays at half. The cycle of that tree, that sign, and that pole continues as the whispers swirl around me. I can't remember the last time I've been so scared. I keep my eyes locked forward, ignoring the darkness behind me, ignoring the urge to check if something is following. My only plan is to drive and never look back. I have always been strict with my schedule. I check my watch every hour, even on weekends. I plan my day in 15-minute blocks, and I stick to that plan without hesitation. If a meeting is set for 9 in the morning, I arrive 10 minutes early. If I say I will eat lunch at noon, I am in the kitchen at 11:59. My friends call me obsessive. I call it necessary. My routine keeps me steady. It keeps me focused. I have never questioned it because it works for me. I get up at the same time every day. I go to bed at the same time every night. My life feels predictable, and I like that. So when I decided to buy a clock at an antique auction, it was just another way to keep things in order. I wanted something reliable and traditional. I wanted something that would fit in with my sense of structure. I never expected it to break that structure apart. I went to the auction on a Saturday afternoon. I had already looked at the pictures online. I saw a grandfather clock covered in ornate carvings, a small brass carriage clock, and a few old watches. One of them was a pocket watch from the 1800s. But when I arrived, I saw this simple pendulum clock in the corner of the room. It had a wooden case with no fancy designs. The face was plain, with numbers that looked slightly faded. The glass over the face had a few scratches, but nothing too deep. The auctioneer said it dated back to the early 1900s, but he didn't have many details. The moment I laid eyes on it, I felt drawn to it. I felt a sudden need to own it. I can't explain why. It just felt right. So I bid on it. The bidding didn't go very high. I won, and I took it home that same day. When I got it into my apartment, I set it up against the wall in my living room. It was about chest height, a bit smaller than other pendulum clocks I'd seen. I gently pushed the pendulum to start it swinging. I listened to the steady tick-tock. It sounded deep and calm. At first, it felt comforting. I thought it would help me maintain my schedule. I even wrote down the exact time I started it, so I could compare its accuracy with my wristwatch. That's what I do. I check for consistency. I was eager to see if it would match the seconds on my digital clock. The first evening, I noticed the pendulum didn't slow down. Most pendulum clocks need a little winding now and then, or at least a slight push if they lose momentum. This one didn't. I watched it for an hour. The arc of its swing stayed the same. The tick-tock never missed a beat. I felt impressed at first. Then a small part of me felt uneasy. I brushed that feeling aside. Maybe it was just a high-quality mechanism. Maybe the previous owner had it serviced. I went to bed that night around 11 like I always do. I lay there in the darkness, but I still heard the clock. The tick-tock seemed to carry through the walls. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was just tuning into something new in my apartment. After half an hour, I got up and closed the living room door. That helped a little, but I still heard a faint ticking in the background. Sunday morning, I woke up at my usual time. I walked into the living room. The pendulum was still swinging. The clock still showed the correct time down to the minute. I stood there for a moment. I felt a strange heaviness in my chest, like an uncomfortable anticipation. I tried winding the clock even though it didn't seem to need it. The mechanism resisted a bit as though the spring was already tight. Then I tried stopping the pendulum with my hand, out of curiosity. I held it in place for a moment. When I let go, it started swinging again. It was subtle at first. It moved maybe half an inch, then an inch, then it kept building. In a few seconds, it was swinging in the same steady arc as before. My breathing got shallow. and my forehead felt damp. I walked into the kitchen and tried to ignore that nervous feeling. I told myself it was just an old clock. Maybe it had a well-crafted escapement. Maybe I was just overthinking it. I had my breakfast, cleaned up, and went about my day. At times, I caught myself glancing toward the living room doorway, waiting to hear a pause in the ticking. It never paused. I checked the clock repeatedly. It was always right on time. My wristwatch matched the clock exactly. That evening, I felt a tightness in my stomach. I had this suspicion that the clock's pendulum moved faster whenever I felt anxious. I first noticed it after I had a conversation on the phone that stressed me out. It wasn't a major argument. It was just a disagreement with a coworker. But as soon as I hung up, I sensed the ticking had become a bit quicker. I walked into the living room, and I stared at the pendulum. I swear it was swinging in a sharper rhythm than before. I timed it against my watch. I counted the seconds between ticks. For a minute, it seemed like it was moving too quickly. Then it evened out again. I stood there, feeling my heart beating fast. I wondered if I was imagining it. I rubbed my face and tried to let it go. Monday morning, I got ready for work. The sound of the clock followed me around the apartment. I took a shower and I thought I heard its ticking through the water. I got dressed and I heard it in my bedroom. I ate a quick breakfast, but I felt that same heaviness in my chest. I left for work, relieved to be out of the apartment. All day, I kept looking at my watch and thinking about that pendulum. I kept wondering if it was still swinging. Of course it was. But I kept picturing it in my mind. I felt like I couldn't escape its steady sound. That night, I returned home. The second I walked in, I heard the tick-tock. It was slow and regular, but it felt louder than it had been. I put my bag down on the couch. I stood there staring at it. I could see the reflection of the pendulum in the glass, moving back and forth. I thought maybe the glass was vibrating a bit, but I wasn't sure. My chest felt tight again. My palms were damp. I tried opening a window to get fresh air. The ticking continued. I felt a chill up my back. There was no breeze in the room. There was only that constant motion, that unstoppable pattern. I went about my usual evening routine. I ate dinner, did some light exercise, and checked my schedule for the next day. I found myself pausing to listen for changes in the clock's rhythm. Sometimes I swore it was faster. Other times it sounded normal. By the time I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I was exhausted from worrying about it. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. Around midnight, I heard the ticking through the walls again. It was an unbroken pulse in the silence. I got up, walked into the living room, and stood in front of the clock. The pendulum kept swinging, never slowing. I tried holding it again. Once more, it forced itself back into motion the second I released it. I noticed I was breathing hard. My pulse felt strong in my neck. I looked at the pendulum. I realized it was swinging in the same pattern as my heartbeat. That made me feel a rush of panic. I felt my heartbeat speed up, and I saw the pendulum match it. I backed away, stumbling slightly. My breath came out shaky. I forced myself to turn around and go back to my bedroom, but I couldn't sleep the rest of the night. On Tuesday, I decided to cover the clock with a heavy blanket to block the sound. I wrapped it up, but I still heard the ticking through the fabric. The blanket muffled it a bit, but the rhythm remained. I felt my hands shaking as I tried to fix the blanket in place. I tried not to look at the glass door. I didn't want to see the pendulum. I locked myself in my bedroom and turned on the television to drown out the sound. For a while, that helped. I stayed in bed with the TV on low volume, watching random shows until I drifted off. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up. My room felt cold. The TV was still on, but the volume was low. I heard the ticking. I felt my heart beating. I heard my pulse in my ears, and I noticed the clock ticking at the same speed. I couldn't ignore it. My eyes wouldn't close. I paced around my bedroom, rubbing my arms to warm myself up. My mouth felt dry. I didn't bother trying to sleep again. The next day, I tried everything to stop the noise. I removed the weights inside the clock. I took out a part of the mechanism that looked like it controlled the pendulum's swing. I placed the pieces on the coffee table. I set the pendulum aside. I thought that would be the end of it. But when I walked back into the living room after cleaning up, I saw the pendulum gently swaying again as if nothing had changed. The parts I had removed were still on the table. The clock's face moved in perfect harmony with the swinging metal. My skin tingled with sweat. My throat felt tight. I reached out to grab the pendulum, but I had this sudden sensation of my chest pounding. My arms felt weak. I pulled my hands back. I stood there, breathing fast. The air felt thick and I had trouble swallowing. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket and that sound made my heart jump. The instant my heart jumped, the pendulum's speed increased, then settled back. I lost my balance and dropped to one knee. I sat there with my head down, trying not to pass out. After a moment, I crawled out of the living room, not looking back at the clock. I spent the next few days trying to avoid the living room. I worked from home on my laptop, huddled in the corner of my bedroom. I kept the door closed, but I still heard the ticking through the walls. My appetite dropped. My eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep. Each night, the ticking got louder in my mind. My heart pounded harder whenever I heard it. I drank coffee to stay awake during the day, but that made my heart rate go up, which sped the pendulum up. By Thursday, I was a nervous mess. My hands shook. My shoulders felt tight all the time. I felt lightheaded whenever I stood up. By Friday morning, I decided I couldn't stay there anymore. I wanted to leave my apartment. I started packing a bag, but while I was packing, I realized something. I kept hearing the ticking even if I covered my ears. It was like it was inside my body. I felt my heartbeat, and I felt that steady talk in my chest. I froze in the middle of the room, holding a pair of pants in my hand. I didn't know what to do. I just knew I couldn't stay near that clock. I ran into the living room, wrapped the entire clock in 2 blankets, and dragged it out to the hallway. I leaned it against the wall near the elevator. A neighbor stepped out of his door and looked at me, confused. I didn't say anything. I just dragged the clock to the elevator, pushed the button, and waited. The ticking never stopped. I heard it through the blankets. My pulse raced again, and the ticking got faster. I managed to get the clock downstairs to the storage room. I put it in a corner. I tried to walk away, but I heard the ticking behind me. I came back upstairs, closed my door, and collapsed onto my couch. The quiet lasted for a few minutes. My heartbeat slowed down. I thought maybe I had solved the problem. Then I felt it. I felt a faint vibration in the floor, a subtle tap in the walls. My chest started pounding again. I heard the ticking coming from the vents. I stood up and yelled at the empty room. My voice echoed back. The clock wasn't even in the apartment anymore, but I still felt it. My head ached. My eyes burned. I paced around, trying to stay calm. I rubbed my temples, but that didn't help. I tried playing loud music. I still heard the ticking. I sank to the floor and stared at the ceiling. Eventually, I went down to the storage room again, thinking I could destroy the clock. But when I walked in, the pendulum was swinging even though it was covered in blankets. I pulled the blankets away. The face pointed right at me, and the ticking felt like it was pumping through my veins. My heartbeat pounded in my chest, and the pendulum sped up, matching every thump. My vision blurred for a moment. My hands shook. I picked up a hammer and swung it at the case. I expected the wood to splinter. The hammer bounced off. I tried again and again, but it didn't leave a mark. The floor beneath the clock rattled with each strike, but the clock remained intact. I threw the hammer aside and stepped back, gasping for air. I turned around and left the storage room, leaving the blankets scattered on the floor. I pressed the elevator button and closed my eyes. My heart was racing, and the ticking was all I could hear. When I got back to my apartment, I locked the door. I sat against the wall, hugging my knees. I felt sweat trickle down my neck. My mouth was dry. I kept waiting for the ticking to stop, but it never did. It was faint, but it was there, following my pulse. I tried to breathe slowly, to calm my heart, but I couldn't. Every time my heart beat, I heard another tick, and it kept me locked in that moment of panic. I stayed like that for hours, staring at the door, expecting the clock to burst into my home again. It never did, but the tick-tock remained. I still hear it now every second like a part of my own body. I can't make it go away. I feel it in my pulse and I hear it in the walls. I don't know how to stop it. I only know that it won't leave me alone. My routine is gone. My schedule is ruined. That clock has taken over every corner of my life and I can't turn it off. It doesn't lose energy. It never stops. And the worst part is, I feel like I'm tied to it with every beat of my heart. I still remember the moment I arrived at that old mansion. I stepped out of my van and looked up at the tall structure perched on the edge of the cliff. The wind from the ocean whipped across my face. The windows were dark, and the front doors were shut tight. It felt like the building was waiting for me to come closer. I stood there for a few seconds, taking in the cracked walkway and the chipped paint on the walls. My instructions were clear. Fix an antique piano that had been silent for years. As a piano tuner, I'm used to quiet spaces, but something about this place made the silence feel heavier than usual. I walked to the front door. It creaked when I pushed it open. I heard my footsteps echo down a long hallway. The air smelled stale. I set my tool bag on the dusty floor. My eyes scanned the foyer. A staircase led to the second floor, and there were tall doors on each side. The walls had old portraits in faded frames, but I didn't pay much attention to the people in the photos. I was focused on my job. I had a name and a number to call if I finished early. My contact told me no one had stayed in the house for decades, but the owners wanted to sell it soon. They wanted the piano in working order, hoping it would add some value. I found the piano in a large room at the end of the hallway. The windows faced the sea, and I could see the waves crashing against the rocks below. The piano sat in the corner, covered with a thick sheet. The wood on the sides looked scratched, but the strings inside were in decent condition. I did a quick inspection. The keys were slightly yellowed with age. The hammers showed some wear, but I've seen worse. I pressed a few keys, expecting at least a broken or muted sound, but there was nothing. It was as if I'd pressed down on silent rubber. No vibrations, no echo, nothing. I double-checked the strings. They were tight enough. The hammers moved when I pressed the keys, so there wasn't a mechanical block. It should have produced some kind of sound. I tapped the side of the piano with my knuckles. That made a dull thump, so I knew the wood wasn't hollowed out or rotting. I pressed the sustain pedal. It felt normal. Then I struck a chord with more force. Still silence. That's when I felt the first wave of unease. The piano looked perfectly functional. There was no physical reason for it to be silent. I decided to set up my tools. I adjusted the tuning pins, tested the action, and checked the felt on the hammers. I tapped each note in order, from the lowest to the highest. My ear is used to hearing the smallest changes in pitch, yet all I got was that same silence. I jiggled the hammers, and they wobbled like they should, but they didn't make a sound when they struck the strings. I used my flashlight to check every corner of the instrument. No blocks, no foreign objects, no water damage, nothing. I sat back and rubbed my eyes. I've tuned pianos in all kinds of conditions, but I had never encountered one that looked functional, yet produced no sound at all. I went to the van for more specialized equipment. I grabbed a small digital recorder too. I wanted to see if some kind of low-frequency tone might be getting picked up. Sometimes I can't hear certain frequencies, but a recorder can. I placed the recorder near the piano, hit record, and pressed the keys again. Still silence. After a minute, I stopped the recording and played it back. There was only my breathing and the faint hum of the ocean outside. Nothing else. I considered calling my contact to explain, but I decided to keep trying. I told myself I must have missed a hidden crack or a disconnection in the mechanism. I lifted the lid and checked the harp. It was dusty, but no cracks. The pins were sturdy. Each string was intact. I pressed a key while watching the hammer move. I watched it hit the string. It should have vibrated. It didn't. The string didn't quiver at all. It was as if the entire instrument had decided to ignore the laws of sound. My hands started to sweat. I stayed in that room for hours, poking and prodding. Eventually, I felt like I was losing track of time. The sun had gone down. The light coming in through the windows was gone, leaving the room lit by a single lamp I'd brought in from the foyer. The rest of the house was pitch black. The wind made a low rumble outside, and I heard the old beams of the house groaning. At some point, I stood up and stretched. I moved around to ease the stiffness in my shoulders. Then, in the corner of my eye, I saw something shift. I turned around, but nothing was there, except the piano. I laughed at myself. I was probably tired. I told myself to focus. I decided to organize my tools and maybe head to one of the bedrooms for a few hours of sleep. That's when I heard a brief cluster of notes behind me. It was a strange, dissonant chord, like random notes mashed together. My heart jerked in my chest. I spun around, shining my flashlight on the piano. The keys were still. Nothing moved. I swallowed hard and took a step closer. Everything looked the same as before. There was no sign that any key had been touched. I tried to rationalize what I heard. Maybe it was the wind in the chimney, or some draft that made the strings vibrate. But there was no chimney in that room, and I hadn't felt any draft. I set up the recorder again just in case. I pressed record, walked over to the piano and pressed a few keys. No sound. Then I turned my back and stood quietly for a moment. I waited and listened. I heard nothing but the wind outside and the creaks of the old house. After a minute or two, I played the recording back. It was just my breathing and a bit of static. I shut off the recorder. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. That chord had sounded so real. I closed the fallboard over the keys. I told myself I needed sleep. I gathered my tools and left the room. I found a bedroom on the second floor. The bed was covered in dust, but it looked sturdy. I brushed it off as best I could and unrolled my sleeping bag on top. I set my alarm for early morning. I wanted to see if daylight made any difference to the piano. I woke up feeling stiff and uneasy. My alarm beeped in the darkness. I rubbed my eyes and checked the time. It was about 6 a.m. The sun was just coming up over the ocean. I stepped into the hallway. The house was silent. I went downstairs and found the main room. The lamp was still where I left it, but now it was off. I flicked the switch and it turned on again. Maybe I had turned it off before going upstairs. I couldn't remember. When I moved closer to the piano, I noticed the fallboard was open. I was sure I'd closed it the night before. I walked over and looked at the keys. They had fingerprints on them, several sets, like someone with dirty or greasy hands had pressed them. My palms began to sweat again. I looked around for footprints on the dusty floor, but I only saw mine. I took my phone out to take a photo. The camera caught the fingerprints just fine. I tried to keep my hands from shaking. I gently touched one of the keys with my fingertip. Still silent. I wiped the fingerprints with a clean cloth. Then I tried pressing the keys again. No sound. I checked the time. It was 6:30 a.m. My stomach growled, so I went to the kitchen to see if there was any bottled water left behind. The cabinets were mostly empty. There was some stale smell, but I didn't see anything useful. I drank a bit of water from a plastic jug I'd brought with me, then returned to the piano room. I kept feeling like I was being watched. I couldn't see anyone, but I felt it. Around mid-morning, I decided to set up my phone on a stand to record video. I placed it so it faced the piano. Then I hit record and left the room, making sure my footsteps were audible on the creaky floor. I went down the hall and stayed there out of view for about 10 minutes. I listened carefully. I heard faint clicking noises, but I wasn't sure if it was coming from the piano or the walls settling. Then I heard it again, a series of notes that sounded jumbled and off-key. It didn't last long, maybe 5 seconds. My breathing quickened. I waited a bit, then walked back into the room. The piano was still there, untouched. I stopped the recording and played it back. The video showed the piano the entire time, but there was no sound in the recording except my footsteps and the faint rustle of my jacket. The weird notes weren't on the video. They were gone. I replayed that video over and over, but I got nothing but silence. I looked at the keys on the screen. They never moved. I knew I'd heard something. I stood there staring at the piano. I felt a chill run up my back. My mouth felt dry, and I could feel my heartbeat in my neck. I moved closer to the piano and inspected the keys again. There were new smudges on them. I had wiped them clean earlier. Now more smudges were there. I wiped them again and pressed the keys. Silence. I opened the top and checked the hammers. Everything was in place. My hands were shaking as I slid my tools out of my bag. I tightened a few pins, hammered on the strings lightly with a small tuning hammer, just to see if they would vibrate. There was a slight metallic ring each time I hit a string with my hammer, so the strings weren't physically dead. They reacted to direct impact. But whenever I pressed a key, nothing happened. I lost track of how many times I tried pressing those keys. The same result. Silence. I repeated the sequence, then stood up. I turned around and took a step away. Behind me, I heard a shaky note that tapered off into something like a moan. It lasted maybe half a second. My throat tightened. I turned and lunged at the piano, lifting the lid again, trying to see if the hammers were still vibrating. They were motionless. The strings didn't move. I felt sweat running down my forehead. I decided to leave the place for a bit. I went outside, got into my van, and started the engine. I sat there thinking about what I should do. Part of me wanted to drive away. Another part of me felt like I had an obligation to fix that piano. But it wasn't a normal situation. My job is to find mechanical problems, not to deal with whatever this was. I killed the engine and stepped back into the house, determined to stay until I could at least give my contact a proper explanation. That evening, I ate a few energy bars and drank some more water. The house felt even darker than before. The wind was stronger and the air inside felt cold. I brought my sleeping bag down to the piano room. I wanted to see if anything happened at night. I set up my phone to record again, but this time I left it charging. I had a flashlight by my side. Hours passed. I was half dozing when I heard a distorted chord echo across the room. It startled me awake. I scrambled to my feet and grabbed my flashlight. I shone it on the piano. The keys were depressed in random spots, as if someone had just played them. They rose slowly, one by one, like a delayed action. I stood there, breathing hard. Then I aimed my phone at the piano, trying to catch something in the act. I saw nothing but the still shape of the instrument and the reflection of my light on the polished wood. I picked up the phone and checked the video. All it showed was darkness and my own breathing. No notes, no movement. I looked at the piano again, and I saw new fingerprints. It was the same pattern of smudges, but now on the higher keys. My hands shook as I leaned in. The smudges were shaped like long fingers with wide tips. I pressed my own hand next to them. They were bigger than my fingers. I stayed awake the rest of the night. Every time I tried to relax, I heard faint tones coming from behind me. They always stopped the moment I looked at the piano. My shoulders ached from tension. My head pounded. The house groaned in the wind, and I kept expecting something to appear in the doorway. But I never saw anything except the dusty halls and the shadows cast by my flashlight. By the time morning arrived, my nerves were raw. I stood by the window, staring at the gray sky. The ocean below looked choppy. I decided I wasn't going to spend another night there. I packed my tools. I wiped the keys clean one more time just to leave it in some presentable state, even though it was silent. I wanted to send a message to my contact later and tell them to find someone else, or to just let the piano stay how it was. I was done. There was no mechanical fix. Whatever was happening wasn't in my realm of expertise. Before leaving, I walked around the house, turning off the lights I'd used. I closed a few doors to keep the draft out. I went back to the foyer. That's when I heard one last note from the piano. It was a low, scratchy tone like a bass note played with too much force. I didn't go back to check. I didn't want to see the fingerprints again. I just left. I still don't know how to explain that piano. Everything looked normal. The hammers, the strings, the pedals, the keys. They all functioned as expected, but they refused to make a sound when I tried to play them. Yet I kept hearing those dissonant chords when I wasn't looking. I tried to record them, but my devices never captured anything. I don't have a good answer for what caused those smudges either. All I know is that it felt wrong. It felt like the instrument had a presence that didn't want me there. When I drove away, I saw the mansion disappear in my rearview mirror. I felt relief once I reached the main road. I promised myself I would tell my contact I couldn't fix that piano. I'd report the strings were intact, but it had issues I couldn't solve. I thought about that silent instrument a lot on my way home. My only comfort was leaving it behind. I wasn't about to spend another night in that place, listening for sounds that shouldn't exist. That's my entire story, told as straight as I can manage. I value silence, but not the kind I found in that old mansion by the cliff. I hope I never have to go back. I never expected to feel so exposed at night. I moved to this place because I wanted quiet evenings, cool air from the sea, and a sense of peace. I wanted to leave behind the noise of traffic and the stress that followed me in the city. At first, my nights here felt restful and calm. I slept well and I woke up without headaches. But then I heard rumors about this little cove with dark sand, hidden behind a patch of jagged rocks. Local folks said strange things happened there after midnight. They claimed they heard strange sounds, saw unusual patterns in the sand, and even felt the ground vibrate under their feet. They insisted I stay away, but I don't like being told where I can't go. So I decided to check it out on a night with no moon. That was when I realized these rumors weren't just exaggerations. Something is there, and it's worse than I imagined. I've been renting a small one-bedroom house not far from the shoreline. The house feels old and creaks whenever the wind picks up, but I find a sense of comfort in its simple layout. From my living room window, I can glimpse the ocean. Most days, I walk around the rocky perimeter that leads to the cove. The sand there is grainy and dark, almost black in color. When I first saw it, I noticed that the texture looked coarser than regular beach sand. It's rough on the feet. The grains stick to my shoes if I'm not careful. I never saw anyone else there, which struck me as odd because every other beach in the region has a few people, at least during the day. That cove always stays empty. I started asking a few locals about it. Some shrugged and said the place made them uncomfortable, though they couldn't explain why. Others told me about a long-standing rumor. During low tide on certain nights, odd shapes appear on the sand. I asked what kind of shapes, and their responses varied. One person said it looked like footprints arranged in a pattern, but he didn't look me in the eye when he said it. Another said he had heard a loud breathing sound in the wind when he stood near the shore. One older man just advised me to be careful after dark. At first, I shrugged these stories off. I've heard plenty of small-town myths. I spent a few nights walking around the coastline, but nothing unusual happened. I saw the tide go in and out. I breathed in the salty air and I returned home with a sense of calm. But a few nights ago, I noticed something different in the atmosphere. The sky had no moon, so it was darker than usual. The wind felt colder on my skin, and I couldn't shake off a tense feeling in my neck and shoulders. I decided that was the night I would explore the cove. I grabbed a small flashlight, put on sturdy shoes, and headed out. Walking on the path that led to the cove felt a little nerve-wracking. The wind rustled through the brush and I heard branches snapping in the distance. The only light came from my flashlight beam, which cut through the darkness in a narrow line. I stepped over some stones and past a few larger rocks. The waves sounded loud, more forceful than I expected. As I got closer, I could see the outline of the cove. The sand seemed darker than ever. It almost blended into the night sky. I climbed down a small slope, careful not to slip. The sand shifted beneath my feet with each step. It felt thick and grainy, even through my shoes. I switched off my flashlight for a moment, hoping to let my eyes adjust to the darkness. When I did that, I heard a strange noise, almost like a soft thud in the distance. I turned the flashlight back on, but I didn't see anything. I took a few steps forward and noticed the tide was low. The ocean had pulled back, leaving a long stretch of wet sand near the water's edge. My eyes scanned the area for anything odd. At first, I saw nothing but my own footprints. Then I noticed a set of deeper impressions, arranged in a rough half circle. I walked closer, shining the beam of my flashlight along the sand. The impressions looked like footprints, but they were about twice as deep as mine. They were placed almost in a perfect curve. I crouched down and traced the edge of one with my hand. The sand there felt unusually cold, colder than the rest of the beach. I stood up, glanced around, and realized these prints continued, forming a near-perfect circle further up the shore. I wasn't sure what to think, but my heart started pounding. My breath grew heavier and my hands got clammy. I could feel a buzzing sensation in my chest. I told myself to keep calm and check them out more carefully. I followed the line of prints, stepping alongside them. Each footprint had the same shape with a defined heel and toes, but they were large and pressed far down into the sand. They almost looked like something stomped in one spot repeatedly, forming deep divots. Then I heard a new sound, a strong, inhaling noise, as if something large was breathing in and out at a quick pace. It seemed to come from behind me, but when I turned around, I saw nothing. The hair on my arms stood up. I shone my flashlight across the beach, but I only saw the dark expanse. My own footprints were behind me, and these circular prints were on my right. Then I heard that same breathing noise again, but this time it sounded like it came from my left. I whipped around, feeling a jolt of fear shoot up my spine. Nothing there, only darkness and the faint reflection of the sea. My instincts told me to leave, but I also felt a strange compulsion to understand what was happening. I stepped toward the waterline to see if the pattern of footprints continued there. The tide had pulled back, so the wet sand glistened under the faint starlight. As I approached, I saw more prints forming. They weren't just there already. They were appearing bit by bit. I watched the sand indent in real time, like something invisible was pressing down. My chest felt tight. I could sense my heart beating against my ribs. I tried to slow my breathing, but it just got faster. My hands shook and my flashlight trembled in my grip. I backed away, thinking I should leave right then, but my legs felt shaky, as if they didn't want to move. Then I noticed that the footprints were starting to form a new circle, and they were closing in around the area where I stood. I watched them appear in lines that connected, forming a wider ring. That ring shifted inward with each new imprint. I couldn't see what was making them, but I felt something in the air, like a pressure that pressed down on my lungs. It felt like I was standing too close to a huge magnet. My stomach churned. I forced myself to speak out loud, just to break the silence. My voice sounded shaky. I said something like, "Who's there? Show yourself." Of course, I got no response, except for that breathing noise again. It sounded even closer now, like it was circling me. The footprints were so deep that I wondered how much force was behind them. I tried to run. My plan was to get out of that cove, climb the rocks, and hurry back to the main road. But when I turned toward the slope, I noticed the tide had crept in much further. Water covered a large stretch of the sand I had crossed earlier. The wind kicked up, blowing cold air against my face. I could smell the salt more strongly. My legs felt numb, but I started moving, trying to find a path around the water. As I walked quickly along the cove, I felt something grip my right ankle. It wasn't a physical hand I could see, but I felt the pressure. It was cold and strong, like a clamp around my leg. I lost my balance and nearly fell, but I managed to pull away with a quick yank. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst. I got the sense that something was trying to drag me back toward those footprints. I fought the urge to panic. I pressed forward, stepping into water that reached my calves. The shock of cold water stung my skin, but I kept going. Then I felt another tug on my left leg, strong enough to make me gasp. I swung my flashlight around, expecting to see a hand or a tentacle or something, but I saw only my own leg submerged in the water. Yet the pull remained. It jerked me backward, and my foot slipped on the wet sand. I nearly fell face first into the water. My heart raced and my lungs felt tight. I got back on my feet and inched my way around the cove, sticking closer to the rock wall. The water was creeping up fast, and the wet sand made it hard to walk. I glanced behind me and saw the footprints moving in a path that looked like a spiral. They connected in overlapping circles, all leading closer to the center of the beach. The breathing noise rose and fell in short bursts. It reminded me of a panting animal, but I didn't see anything there. I reached the far end of the cove where the rocky slope started. I tried to climb, slipping on the wet stones. My chest tightened, and I could feel an odd vibration in the ground. Each time I put my hand on a rock, I felt it tremble. My throat felt dry. I tried to swallow, but I kept gagging. I used my flashlight to find stable footing. The wind whipped around my face, and I tasted salt on my lips. Finally, I spotted a small ledge I could climb onto. I scrambled up, holding my flashlight in my mouth for a second so I could use both hands. My palms were sweaty, and I kept losing my grip on the rocks. Below me, the water kept rising, and the footprints on the shore began to fade as the waves washed over them. But I could still feel something tugging at me, like invisible strands of force reaching out. I kicked at the air behind me, like that would help. I forced myself to focus on climbing. The breathing sounds rose in volume, echoing off the rock walls. It felt like multiple sets of lungs were working in unison. My heart pounded, and my legs started to cramp. I pushed upward until I finally reached a flatter surface near the top of the slope. I lay on my back for a moment, trying to catch my breath. My head spun, and my clothes were damp from sweat and splashes of seawater. I looked down at the beach. The tide now covered most of the dark sand. I could still make out a few partial footprints near the edges, but the rest disappeared underwater. The breathing noise didn't stop, though. It sounded like it was all around me, coming from the rocks, the water, and even the air. My arms felt cold and my hands shook. I got up and continued along the rocky path, stepping carefully. I aimed my flashlight at the ground to avoid tripping. Every few seconds I glanced behind me, expecting to see something large climbing after me, but I only saw the rolling waves. My throat felt tight, and my mouth was dry. My mind raced with the idea of running faster, but the terrain made that impossible. If I slipped and fell, I wouldn't stand a chance. After several minutes, I finally reached the path that led toward my house. The wind was still cold, and the darkness felt suffocating, but at least the ground was more even. My flashlight started to flicker. I tapped it, and the beam steadied again. I forced myself to keep moving until I saw the outline of the small wooden gate that led to my front yard. The gate's latch squeaked. I stumbled inside, shut the gate behind me, and collapsed onto my porch chair. My body trembled, and I felt sweat drip down my face. My shirt clung to my back, and my fingers were so stiff that I could barely unlace my shoes. I sat there for a while, staring at the path I had just come from. The breathing sounds were gone, replaced by the normal whistle of the wind and the soft rustle of nearby trees. I was safe for the moment, but my heart wouldn't slow down. I haven't gone back to that cove since. I still hear the ocean at night, and I still feel a chill in the air sometimes, but I'm not the same. Each time I think about those footprints, I recall the cold grip on my ankles and that circle pattern in the sand. I remember that sense of being surrounded by something I couldn't see. I remember the rising tide and the tug that nearly dragged me under. For now, I'll stay away. I don't want to know what happens if I go back. I can still feel that presence, and I don't plan to test it again. I'm not here to tell a long-winded story. I just want to lay out exactly what happened to me on that road. I've been riding for years, alone most of the time. I like the quiet. I like feeling the engine rumble under me without anyone else around. But one night I ran into something I can't explain. It was close to 3 in the morning. I had been riding for hours on a back road that I'd never seen crowded, even in the daytime. I remember the air getting cold. My neck and arms felt the chill first. There was no wind. Everything around me seemed still. My headlights were the only light source for miles. I hadn't passed a single house or gas station for at least an hour. I saw a thick wall of fog up ahead, and I slowed down because I couldn't see beyond it. As soon as I entered the fog, I felt the moisture cling to my jacket. Tiny droplets formed on my visor. My high beams bounced back at me, so I switched to low beams. The road was slick under my tires, so I kept my speed down. I felt my stomach tighten. I don't usually get jumpy just because of